Giving feedback to other students and being a mentor to others is actually a very effective way of improving your own skills by training your eye for seeing mistakes accurately. But it's also a very transferable skill. For one example, a lot of the skills that I learned to be a doctor were actually trained from my experiences as a mentor and an educator. And you can imagine that any interpersonal, especially in a professional setting, any type of interpersonal communication would actually be heightened by having better communication skills, being better at giving and receiving criticism and feedback, and having that kind of dynamic where you are someone that role models behaviors and work in a way that others aspire to follow. So in this course, we're going to cover some of the basics you need to understand to give good feedback. Now, the first thing is that you have to understand your role. Your role as someone that gives feedback is that of a person that can be trusted and then gives feedback. And it seems completely obvious. However, one of the most common mistakes that I find, especially with younger students that are still in high school, they haven't really had as much life experience, they haven't had as much experience being a mentor or role model to other people. I find this especially the case actually with only children, is that they have a tendency to make the feedback about themselves. And so this is actually the most important first thing I'm going to say, is that when you're in a mentoring role, when you're giving feedback to someone else, you have to let go of your own ego. And you might think, no, it's not about me, it's not about my ego. However, in my experience, I have noticed that this is pretty common actually for a lot of students entering into this role, is that they will justify why something is important based on their own authority. And so they will, in a way, pump up their own authority in order to make their advice seem more legitimate. Statements like, you have to trust me because I am this type of person, I'm this student. You know, they're almost painting themselves as this is the type of person that you want to be, therefore you need to listen to me. Now, that may be true, but there are more effective ways to communicate it. And sometimes that approach is required and necessary when other approaches fail or the situation calls for it. But most of the time, that can be due to the ego speaking. We don't want to use feedback as an opportunity to flex our own skills. It needs to be really about the person that you're getting feedback from. Because there's nothing more frustrating than being someone that is seeking feedback. You put your work out there. You know, you're shy, you might be feeling nervous. You put it out there onto the group, and then this mentor figure who you respect and look up to looks at the work and uses that as an opportunity to sort of boast about their own achievements and say, well, this is not good. Look at my one. My one is so much better than your one. Or in a more implicit way, you need to work on this issue, this issue, this issue, this issue, this issue, and just bombarding them with a list of problems. So, number one, when you're giving feedback, you need to make sure it's about the other person. You're focusing it on the other person, and you're not using it as a way to boast about yourself or to give yourself a platform to say, here I am, so good at what I'm doing compared to you. And you can try to dress it up however you want, but you will know deep in yourself if that is actually what you're doing. Rule number one, we take the ego out of the equation, which means that sometimes we may even be wrong. We may give feedback and we may realize that feedback wasn't correct. And if we're coming into that feedback hard and sharp and pointed or edgy or super confident, and then we find out that that feedback was wrong, now that puts us in an awkward position because now we're having to kind of retract those statements, and it doesn't make you look good, and it's gonna, probably damage your ego if anything. So always keep in mind, how much more you have to know, where your expertise is, and offer your opinion, offer your perspective in a way that will be helpful to the other person, and simply leave it at that. Continuing on from this idea of ego and not it being about ourselves, but about the other person, there is a perspective that anyone that gives feedback, any coach, any mentor, any role model needs to have, which is that of what's called a second order observer. Now, a second order observer is not interested in the actual event itself. So the analogy here would be, let's imagine that you are teaching your friend how to take good photographs. And they come to you and ask you, how can I take better looking photographs? Now, you, in this situation, would be a second order observer. Your friend is the one behind the camera trying to take the photograph. You are the one watching your friend take the photograph. You're not interested so much in what they are seeing. You're not so interested in the photo that they get to at the end of the day. What you're interested in is, how is the person using their techniques, using their skills, what are they doing and engaging with? What is this person's process? So the first order observer, this is the person that is actually doing the task. This person is observing what needs to be done to do the task, and their output is going to be the actual action itself. The second order observer is observing the first order observer, and they are looking at what is the process that they're engaging with. What are the thoughts they are having? How are they thinking about it? What is their perspective? And we're wanting to understand all of these question marks. So when you're giving feedback to another person, you don't always know what mindset they're coming from. You don't know what perspective they're at. You don't know what skill level they have. You don't know how they're thinking about it. And as you know, techniques can have a lot of different interpretations. You may think it's one way the first time, but then with some experience and some guidance, you realize that's actually another way. And simply telling the person, you need to see it this way, number one, doesn't actually allow them to see it that way because they haven't transformed their own thinking, which means the way that they know how to think is still their original way. And sure, you may have told them another way of thinking, but they're not able to replicate that independently by themselves. So that means that when they go away, they're likely to just make the same mistake again. So instead, when we see someone's work, we should ask them some probing questions. We should ask them, well, what do you think about this? What do you think about this area? Are there any limitations that you think there are? What are the things that you think that you've done well? By asking some of these very basic questions, we get an insight into how they think about their own work, what they've done well, what they haven't done well, and an idea about their perspective. It's completely different to see someone's work that looks like it's full of mistakes, but then they realize that there's these mistakes, and they're using a good Kolb's experiential learning cycle to try to overcome that. That's a completely different story to someone thinks that their work is amazing, they're not using their experiential cycle, they're in a rush to move forward, and their work may be maybe even a little bit better than the other person, but who would you feel more confident on a month or two from now? Almost always, it's going to be that person that appreciates the foundations, that's engaging in the right process. And this is something that you can't tell just from looking at the work, at least until you have a very, very, very experienced eye. So before offering the advice, you should always engage in a bit of a discussion, even if it's brief, to get an idea of that person's thoughts. And then the advice that you give is actually based on that way of thinking. So let's say that they're not engaging in their experiential cycle. The advice that you should give in terms of their feedback is getting them to understand why that's important, exploring their thoughts on why that's important, and then advising them to engage more with the experiential cycle. You can finish off by pointing out the things that they can do better and guide them with their technique and all of those things. But it is important to make sure that the student themselves does feel involved with the process. They're not being lectured at, they're not being overtly criticized, and importantly, they should understand what they're doing right, because a beginner doesn't know what they're doing right or wrong. So simply pointing out the mistakes will be effective at showing them what their mistakes are. But then if you don't point out what's good, they may actually change those things as well. which actually may make it worse. So you could just be swapping out mistakes. Fix these mistakes, but bring in a host of new ones because they weren't keeping steady the stuff that they were already doing well. So it's really important to have that balance. Not only giving them the positive encouragement that helps them feel good about themselves, as well as feel motivated and positively reinforced to continue working on this stuff, because we all know it's not the easiest thing. And a little bit of positive encouragement does go a long way, especially from someone that they respect, a role model, a senior student that, obviously has gone through the process on the other side of that tunnel. And we're also pointing out those key pieces of feedback that they need to work on. As you get better and better with your own skills, as your own skills develop further, and those of you that go on later to become coaches, you will start realizing which pieces of feedback are specifically more important than others at different stages of the student's journey. However, for now, just try to keep it balanced, keep it open, keep it encouraging, keep it real and genuine, and approach things from a humble standpoint as someone that's on the same journey, just a little bit ahead. And remember, taking our ego out of the equation. Next up, I want to talk about something called social and emotional learning. Social and emotional learning is a field of education, and it talks about the impact that psychosocial and emotional aspects have on a person's learning outcomes and learning experience. Now, what research tells us is that a significant proportion, anywhere from 30 to even 60% of a student's success is actually based on their social and emotional factors, aka how they feel they belong and how they subjectively feel about the experience. For students to be successful, they need to feel that they are well supported, that they have been positively encouraged, that there are clear expectations of them, and that they feel that they are part of a community, a active, contributing, belonging, accepted, embraced member of the community. And you know how much of a difference that community can make. And you may be able to think for yourself what difference it would have made without having that community, what your journey would have felt like. And for some of you, you may have given up before that. For someone that is in a position where they're a core member, giving feedback, it's useful to understand the reasons why some people behave in the way that they do. And there are two broad ways that we can classify a type of abnormal behavior. And I say abnormal not because it's uncommon. In fact, it's actually very common, but because it's a deviation from what we would consider healthy. So when someone has behavior that involves the regulation of emotions, there are a bunch of emotions. These emotions can be ranging from, disappointment, frustration, angry, impatient. The list goes on. The healthy way of dealing with all of this is with appropriate regulation. However, we can also over-regulate or under-regulate these emotions. Now, this does get quite complicated, so I'm not going to go into it in depth. However, when we over-regulate an emotion, it often means that we are thinking about it a lot. So lots of thinking. We can often feel like we are trapped inside our own mind. We can feel like we are spiraling. And the examples of this are anxiety and depression. So people that are coming across very anxious, or they feel it looks like they have low mood, they may be coming from this over-regulation of emotion. Now, I don't want you to do anything with this information quite yet. I just want to lay out a way for you to understand the different ways that people think and behave, to understand that certain types of behavior are simply because of how they're trying to process certain emotions. And it doesn't necessarily reflect completely on the truth, their real thoughts, or how they're really feeling. Or they could say something that's very personal to you, and they may not mean it. That's especially the case when we look at under-regulating emotion. Under-regulating emotion means that we avoid thinking about it, we bottle it up, and this can result in aggressive behavior, defiant behavior, violence even. And so in each of these cases, these are what are considered emotional and behavioral disorders, or EBD for short, emotional and behavioral disorders. And these are called internalizing disorders, whereas these ones are called externalizing disorders, and I think you can guess why. So why am I telling you this? Because you're going to encounter a lot of different types of people, not only through your capacity here as a core member, but also as you go out into the real world and have a lot of different interactions with a lot of different types of people. And you need to understand why certain people have certain types of behavior in order to regulate your own response. So for example, if someone is really struggling with disappointment and frustration, and they're bottling up that emotion, under-regulating it, and therefore acting out in an externalizing way, and you choose to take that personally and therefore attack them back, then what that would do is actually worsen it, because you're only adding to those emotions which they're already unable to regulate. The better thing to do is actually help them to regulate it more healthily. And this is where it's really, really important, is that you need to stay in your own lane. What do I mean by that? I mean, this is very, very complicated. Very complicated. This is the type of thing that if you see someone behaving in a way and you're worried and you're concerned because they are dramatically over-regulating or under-regulating something to the point where it's actually affecting their life. They may be losing sleep, they may be constantly anxious, they may be feeling miserable all of the time, and you're worried, then in this instance, you must seek help. You must not try to fix this yourself. I say this as someone that has not only been a mentor and a coach for students for over 10 years, also as a doctor with significant experience working with different patients with different emotional needs, also having worked for months in psychiatry, including working in the crisis team, but also as someone that has training in mental health. This is not something that I would try to deal with myself. Even I would still refer this person to someone that's more experienced. Now, school guidance counselor, depending on your school, may not be very good. More successful would be a clinical psychologist or speaking to their family doctor, general practitioner. And they will be able to refer them onto specific pathways. And it's very important that you have the maturity to be able to recognize this, know your limits, and give appropriate advice. Encouraging within your capacity, in your lane, advice is fine. But when it comes to stuff that you think is really challenging to deal with, when it's not something that you have full confidence or training in, then you seek help where it's appropriate. You never know, your approach that worked well for you and maybe your friends you think will work well, that may make it worse for this student. And I have seen examples, unfortunately, within my own students where students gave advice to other students and that advice got them hospitalized. And that's never the intention, but it is the reality. And we have to be very careful when it comes to mental health. Because once it's too late, it's too late. You can't take that advice back. So again, remember, come into things open-mindedly, speak about things from your perspective. Because remember, that's all it is at the end of the day. All advice we give is always just our perspective. And when you think that this person needs more help, when we recognize some of these signs of an internalizing or an externalizing emotional behavioral disorder, we give them the advice that maybe they should speak to someone else about it as well, not turning them away, but encouraging them to include another person in that conversation. And if at any point you have difficulty with this, please reach out to us and ask us for advice so that we can be involved in helping you. And all of this should always be confidential. We try to keep a tight-knit community, and part of that tight-knit community is a sense of trust. Once you violate that trust, you're not contributing to the community. So we, as part of the team, and now you, stepping into the position of someone that wants to not only do well for yourself, but pull up the people around you, you also need to start holding yourself to this type of. When you create a positive climate for change, that usually allows the student to have that level of belonging and that positive experience. And the climate refers to the type of environment that they are surrounded in. When you have someone whose environment encourages them to behave in a way that is healthy, that encourages them to reflect, take care of themselves, push hard when they need to, but take a break when they need to regulate and be open about their emotions. When you have someone who is kept motivated and supported, and they know that failure is not only the norm, but encouraged. We encourage failure to happen rapidly because with failure comes growth. When someone is at the edge of their comfort zone, peering into the fear zone, wondering if they have what it takes to go through, what pushes that leap of faith is the confidence that they need to have in themselves. This is something called psychological capital. It's like capital, like money, but it's not material wealth. It's a psychological wealth that gives you the resources to push through challenges, embrace the fear zone, and these are the resources that we transform into a growth mindset. All of these things in their environment, we call that the climate. And the climate is the foundation for a person developing the psychological resources necessary for success. And to no surprise, the people in the community, the people around them, the people they're exposed to, the role models in this group, they are the ones that create this psychological capital. They're the ones that create the psychological capital. And if you have benefited positively from encouragement, from reinforcement, from feeling like you belonged in the community, then I implore you, be now one of those figures that a new student coming in fresh, afraid, uncertain, insecure, generally lost and increasing in confusion by the week, they can look to someone. They can look to you and they can feel that they can do this. They are instilled with a sense of confidence. And I implore you to take up that mantle of the role model. And again, this is a mentality that for any of you who want to be in a position of respect or leadership or to be role models in your community or even wider than that, this is something, the more practice you have, the earlier you have it, the better you're going to be at that thing, maybe 10, 20 years from now. You will look back at this experience and know that this is where you set those first stones. The final points I want to make are around understanding boundaries. And I mean boundaries in two ways. The first way is, what is a boundary of your own skill? What are your limitations? We've talked about your limitations when it comes to mental health, which is very important, but there's also boundaries and limits when it comes to your own skill to deal with academic issues. You right now, I'm sure, are much more equipped than you were before starting this course. But there is still a huge journey awaiting you. In fact, for those of you that will finish Summit, at Summit, there's usually another 2 or 3 solid months of just stabilizing that technique. And for those of you that finish Summit during high school, when you enter into university, you'll find that the changing variables bring a new host of issues that may make you go all the way back to base camp or even the fundamentals to fill in some of the gaps that didn't get filled in the first time round. Just like how you know that when you study a topic, each time you go over it, your knowledge of it deepens and deepens, the same is the case for the techniques in this course. The techniques that you learn, you may have a good level of competency and even fluency over it right now. However, it doesn't mean that you have mastery to a deep level. So don't, again, be so confident in giving advice You don't want to be giving advice and then for an expert to come in and say, no, that's actually wrong, because now the student is very confused. Who do I listen to? Can I trust this person's advice in the future? But if you come in by saying, look, here's my perspective, this is what I think is going on, but these are also some of the things that I'm not 100% certain about that you should check with an expert, then that is a really great modulating piece of information for the person to go and work with. But it's also leaving it open and encouraging them to seek help from an expert or a coach who is much more experienced and much more trained to give hyper accurate, extremely targeted advice. So this is the reason why, for those of you that have had feedback from me directly, you will know that the feedback that I give tends to be a lot more targeted and not always the same as what you're hearing in our community from other members. It doesn't mean that those other members were out to sabotage you. It just means that the limit of their experience was only, this high, which compared to a normal student might be leaps and bounds more than the normal student in the public. But when we're in this course, we need to hold ourselves to a professional standard. We are not the type of community where we're okay with giving half-assed advice. We're not the type of community where we're okay with doing things halfway and leaving people stranded with overconfident, oversold promises. Again, inflating our own ego because we're the person that's giving this advice. We're a community about focusing on each other, focusing on ourselves, and making sure that the advice that we give, we're accountable for, we're responsible for, and we hold ourselves to the standard that other people are not going to hold themselves up to. And that is what separates us from the rest. And speaking to you, I feel I can speak to you in a different way than I would speak to someone that's just coming into the course. Because I feel that if you are at this stage, you know what we stand for and we know the principles that we hold. And you know that the stuff that we teach is very different from what you hear elsewhere. And the reason is because we hold ourselves to that standard. And I would love for you to hold yourself to that standard as well. And on that note is putting yourself first at the end of the day. Focusing on other people, but also, first of all, focusing on yourself. I know that some of you are very eager to help other people, and I love that. And don't lose that. But you have to moderate yourself. Don't ever give so much feedback that you're taking time away from your own study. Don't fall behind because you're too busy helping others. Don't lose out on your own progress, on your own development because you're too involved with other people. That's not your job. And when you're in a position of even greater success, then you'll be in a position of even greater ability to help others. I know that there are students in our community that will spend hours giving feedback to other students. And often that feedback is amazing. And that contribution is gold for the community. But that has to be shared among all the members of the community. Don't sacrifice yourself. Don't be a martyr for other people. Still put yourself first. Protect your own boundaries. Don't get sucked into giving too much feedback because in the worst case scenario, you can get burnt out from helping other people to the point where you don't even want to help other people anymore. And that feeling of burning out, not caring about other people, that will be losing a part of you that is actually probably one of your greatest strengths. So protect that. And the way you protect that is by protecting your time and protecting your priorities. And if you feel that you're struggling, then please do reach out. If you're not comfortable with reaching out to someone else, you can reach out to us and we'll do our best to help you. If we think that it's important for you to talk to someone else, we'll explain our reasoning and our thought process into why, and we'll help you work through it. It is our job to help you do well. Your success is our success. Very literally, no one will sign up to a course where all the students are failing. And we have a lot of experience working with students like yourself, going through an infinite range of problems. We know what it's like to work with students that are trying to balance their school commitments versus maybe what their family is going to think or their parental pressures versus the standards you might place on yourself. We know we've been there and we've worked with students that have been in that situation. And we're good at giving advice that is practical, that's down to earth, that is tailored for you to help you through those issues. So for us, we want to be there as a support person for you. Because if we can support you and you can support other students, then that makes this community really something I think that is special and unique. So finally, I just want to say thank you sincerely for taking the time to learn these skills and these perspectives, and for caring enough about other people to give back and want to give feedback in a better, more constructive way. Being a role model and being a mentor to other people is a deeply fulfilling experience. It's one of the experiences that I enjoy the most. It's one of the things that I loved, not only about being an educator as a doctor, but it's one of the things that pulled me into the education space more and more. And I think that you, the type of person that's going to sit through all these videos and learn these things and take it seriously, I think you're the type of person that will find this type of fulfillment too. I hope you enjoy the rest of your experience through this course. I hope to be able to work with you more moving forward. Commit to the course, don't rush, work on those skills, and hopefully I'll even see some of you becoming coaches at the end of all